The courtroom camera captured the moment Richard Bennett made the biggest mistake of his life. His finger was pointed directly at his 19-year-old daughter, Emily, his face twisted with self-righteous anger as he told Judge Judy and the millions watching that his ungrateful child needed a lesson in respect and obedience. What unfolded became the most viral courtroom moment of 2024, shared over 60 million times across social media and sparking reaction videos, think pieces, and debates about parental control versus genuine love. This wasn't just another small claims argument. It was the moment a controlling father's carefully constructed image of being a concerned parent was torn apart on national television, exposing toxic manipulation he had hidden behind the mask of parenting for nearly 20 years. Richard Bennett entered Judge Judy's courtroom that Tuesday morning with an arrogance cultivated through years of getting his way by intimidation. At 52, the corporate executive wore an expensive suit and carried himself with a posture that radiated superiority. Clutched in his hands was a leather folder he believed contained undeniable proof of his daughter's betrayal and ingratitude. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing speeches about ungrateful children and parental sacrifice. He was convinced Judge Judy would validate his parenting style and humiliate Emily into submission. He genuinely believed the public would applaud him for holding his daughter accountable for what he saw as disrespect to Richard. The lawsuit was a strategic move away to force Emily back under his control and turn her into an example for other children who dared to defy their parents. But he had no idea that Emily had spent the last 2 years quietly saving every manipulative text message, every threatening phone call, and every instance of financial control disguised as generosity. He didn't know she had entered the courtroom with evidence revealing him not as a concerned father, but as a classic narcissistic abuser who had been gaslighting her since childhood. Most of all, he underestimated Judge Judy Shinlin, a woman with decades of family court experience and an uncanny ability to spot parental manipulation within seconds. What Richard expected to be his triumph was about to become one of the most humiliating, televised, exposures of toxic parenting ever recorded. On the surface, the case seemed simpler family dispute about money and boundaries. Richard was suing Emily for $15,000, claiming she owed him 4 years of loans she had never repaid. He had itemized everything: $5,000 for the car he had given her on her 16th birthday, $3,000 for high school graduation money, $2,000 for Christmas gifts over the years, and another $5,000 for various expenses he insisted were loans rather than presents. But everyone in the courtroom, from the production crew to the audience members, who had arrived hours early, could tell this case was about something far darker than money. It was about power. It was about control. It was about a father who had spent 19 years treating his daughter as property rather than a person he was supposed to guide toward. Independence. Emily sat in the plaintiff's chair looking small and afraid, her hands trembling as she clutched her own folder of evidence. She was a college sophomore working 2 jobs to afford community college while sharing a tiny apartment with roommates, having escaped her father's mansion 6 months earlier after years of suffocating control. Throughout her life, Richard had monitored her every move, chosen her friends, dictated her schedule, and weaponized money to enforce compliance with his impossible standards. Every gift had come with strings attached. Every act of generosity had later been used against her with the familiar phrase, "After everything I've done for you." Emily had finally broken free after meeting Jake, a kind 22-year-old who showed her what healthy love actually looked like. But her father's reaction to her independence was immediate and ruthless. He cut her off financially, demanded she return the car she had been making payments on, and then sued her for tens of thousands of dollars, not because he needed the money, but because he needed to punish her for the unforgivable act of choosing her own path. What? Neither Richard nor the audience realized was that Judge Judy had already noticed every red flag in his paperwork before filming even began. She saw the controlling language, the itemized list turning affection into debt, the spiteful timing of the lawsuit immediately after Emily moved out. She had heard thousands of cases just like this one and knew exactly what Richard Bennett was. The only remaining question was how severe his public humiliation would be once she exposed him. Richard Bennett hadn't become a successful corporate executive by chance. He had spent his entire adult life perfecting the art of control, learning how to manipulate situations and people to achieve exactly what he wanted while appearing merely responsible and practical. At work, colleagues described him as demanding but fair, never realizing that behind closed doors, he kept detailed files on every employee's mistakes and used that information as leverage whenever anyone dared question his authority. But his greatest exercise of control wasn't in the office, it was in his own home. For 19 years, he had molded Emily into what he believed was the perfect example of obedience and gratitude. From the moment she was born, he saw her not as an individual with her own thoughts and emotions, but as an extension of himself, a project meant to prove to the world what an exceptional father and leader he was. From the outside, Emily's childhood looked perfect, and that was exactly how Richard intended it to look. They lived in a sprawling home in an upscale neighborhood. Emily attended elite private schools, took piano lessons, joined carefully chosen extracurriculars, and always had the latest clothes and gadgets. Richard made sure everyone knew how much he sacrificed for her, how he worked long hours to give her the opportunities he never had, how he was shaping her future with his generosity and wisdom. But no one outside their home ever saw the suffocating reality of Richard's control. Every gift carried expectations. Every opportunity came with conditions. Every moment of Emily's life was monitored, judged, and criticized. He had installed tracking apps on her phone, demanded full access to her social media, selected her friends based on their parents' social status, and required her to justify every single minute of her day. If she came home even 3 minutes late, he interrogated her like a suspect, accusing her of lying and undermining his authority. The emotional abuse was constant and calculating, crafted to keep Emily dependent and grateful. He would shower her with expensive presents, then weeks later throw them in her face during arguments, saying, "After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me." He criticized her weight, her appearance, her grades, her personality, always claiming he was only trying to help her improve. When she made the honor roll, he pointed out the one subject where she didn't earn a perfect score. When she won an award, he mentioned another student who won more. Nothing Emily did was ever enough, and Richard made sure she understood her value depended entirely on his approval. He constantly compared her to children who were more grateful, more obedient, more respectful of their parents' sacrifices. He repeated over and over that without him, she would be nothing too naive to survive outside his guidance. Lucky to have a father who cared enough to shape her life. As Emily got older, his control only intensified. At 16, he gave her a car for her birthday, making a grand display of generosity in front of the family. But the truth was that Emily had to make the monthly payments from her part-time job, pay for her own insurance, and obey a strict list of rules about where she could drive and who could ride with her. It wasn't a gift, it was another leash, another tool to track her movements and limit her freedom. When she was 17, she tried to go to prom with a boy Richard hadn't approved of, and he threatened to take away her college fund if she disobeyed him. Emily stayed home, crying alone in her room while Richard insisted it was for her own protection. That boy's only wanted one thing, that someday she would appreciate his boundaries. The breaking point came 6 months earlier. When Emily met Jake at her part-time job at a bookstore, Jake was 22, kind, patient, and genuinely interested in who Emily was as a person rather than who someone else expected her to be. He listened when she talked about her dream of becoming a teacher. He encouraged her to trust her own instincts. He treated her as an equal rather than someone who needed constant correction. For the first time, Emily experienced what healthy love actually felt like. And the contrast with her father's suffocating control became impossible to ignore. When Richard learned about Jake, his reaction was instant and explosive. He demanded that Emily end things with this loser who he insisted was manipulating her. He showed up at her campus and caused a scene, attempting to physically drag her to his car. He even called Jake's workplace and tried to get him fired. Richard warned Emily that if she kept seeing him, he would cut her off entirely and she would end up ruined and homeless. That was when Emily made the most difficult decision of her life. With Jake's help, she secretly moved out, blocked her father's number, and chose freedom over financial security. The moment Richard Bennett began speaking in Judge Judy's courtroom, everyone could sense something was fundamentally wrong with his idea of fatherhood. His voice carried that familiar tone of condescending authority one used by people who believe they are explaining simple facts to someone too naive to understand them. "Your Honor, I gave this girl everything," he began, gesturing toward Emily with the dismissive wave you might use toward an underperforming employee. "I paid for the best schools, gave her every opportunity, made sure she had advantages I never had. All I ever asked for was basic respect and gratitude. Instead, she threw it all away for some loser boyfriend she barely knows. Moved out in the middle of the night like a criminal, and now refuses to even speak to me." Young people today think they're entitled to everything without any appreciation for the sacrifices their parents make. Judge Judy sat perfectly still throughout his opening monologue. Her expression revealed nothing. But anyone who had watched her show even briefly could recognize the subtle signs that she was processing every word, every gesture, every unintentional admission Richard made. She noted how he repeatedly said, "my daughter," instead of Emily, as if she were an object rather than a person with her own identity. She observed the aggressive, dominating posture he carried even in a courtroom where he was expected to present a neutral case. She noticed his use of the phrase basic respect when what he clearly meant was total obedience. Most importantly, she heard the underlying belief behind all his claims of sacrifice. His conviction that because he spent money raising his child, she owed him something beyond the natural relationship between a parent and an adult child. Richard grew more animated as he continued, pulling documents from his leather folder with theatrical flair. "Your Honor, I have itemized every single loan I gave this girl. The car I bought her for her 16th birthday, $5,000. Her high school graduation gift, $3,000. Christmas presents. Birthday money, emergency funds when she claimed she needed help. Altogether, it totals $15,000 she promised to repay." He paused dramatically, turning toward the camera as if he were starring in his own program about responsible parenting. "And then she meets this boy, this Jake, who works at a bookstore and has no prospects, no ambition, no future. And suddenly, I'm the villain. Suddenly, I'm the bad guy for expecting her to honor her commitments and show a little gratitude for everything I've done for her." Judge Judy's eyebrows lifted slightly at his phrase "promise to pay back," and she leaned forward with the first question that would begin to unravel Richard's carefully crafted story. "Mr. Bennett, when you gave your daughter these gifts, did you explicitly tell her they were loans that you expected her to repay with interest?" Richard paused for the briefest moment. And in that hesitation, Judge Judy found all the confirmation she needed. "Well, Your Honor, not in those exact words," he said. "But there's an understanding between parents and children that everything comes with expectations. When you raise a child, you're investing in their future, and naturally you expect a return on that investment. That return may not be financial, but it should at least be respect and obedience to reasonable parental authority. The courtroom fell silent as the weight of those words sank in. Richard had openly admitted on national television that he viewed raising his daughter as a financial transaction rather than an act of unconditional love. Judge Judy's expression shifted ever so slightly, and longtime viewers would later point to this moment as the instant she decided. Richard Bennett was about to receive a very painful, very public lesson about the difference between parenting and ownership. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice still professionally calm but edged with steel, "let me ensure I understand your position. You're saying that when you gave your teenage daughter birthday presents and Christmas gifts, you considered those loans she was obligated to repay?" Richard sensed he was losing control of the narrative, and the frustration beneath his polished exterior began to show. "Your Honor," he said, irritation creeping into his tone, "if you had raised children, you would understand that parenting isn't just about handing things out for free. It's about teaching responsibility, accountability, and gratitude," Richard continued. "These kids today think everything should be handed to them without any obligations. Emily needs to learn that her actions have consequences, that she can't just walk away from her family and her responsibilities because some boy tells her what she wants to." Here, the disrespect in his tone was unmistakable, not only toward Emily, but toward Judge Judy as well. He had begun lecturing the judge as if she, too, needed his guidance on how the world worked. That was when Judge Judy did something that made the entire courtroom fall silent. She turned away from Richard entirely and looked directly at Emily with an expression that carried concern, curiosity, and something like recognition and understanding that came from having seen this exact story play out in countless family courtrooms. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Judy said, her voice noticeably softer than the tone she had used with Richard, "do you have something you'd like to tell me about these supposed loans your father claims you owe him?" Emily's hands shook so violently she could barely open her folder. Her voice came out as little more than a whisper. "Your Honor, they weren't loans. They were gifts. I have proof." Richard shot up from his seat, his polished facade cracking instantly. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She's lying. Her boyfriend has manipulated her into believing she doesn't owe her family anything. This is exactly the disrespect I've been talking about." Judge Judy raised her hand, a gesture that had silenced thousands before him, and her voice sliced through his rant like a blade. "Mr. Bennett, sit down right now, or I will have you removed from my courtroom. I am speaking to your daughter, not you. You will wait your turn." The shift was immediate. For the first time since the case began, Richard Bennett was not the one in control. The shock on his face looked like a physical blow. He sank back into his chair slowly, jaw clenched, fingers digging into the armrests. Emily drew a shaky breath and began pulling out documents. What she presented next transformed the case from a simple money dispute into a textbook example of emotional abuse and manipulation. "Your Honor, I have text messages dating back 2 years. I have birthday cards he gave me with the gifts. I have recordings of phone calls. All of them show these were given as gifts, not loans, and he only started calling them loans after I moved out." Judge Judy took the first document, a birthday card from Emily's 16th birthday. She read aloud the message Richard had written inside. "To my beautiful daughter on your sweet 16. This car is yours. No strings attached, because you deserve the world. May it take you wherever you dream of going. Love, Dad." The silence afterward was crushing. Judge Judy looked up, fixing Richard with a stare sharp enough to cut steel. "Mr. Bennett, this card clearly says no strings attached. Would you like to explain how a gift with no strings becomes a $5,000 loan?" Richard's confidence drained from his face, replaced by a mottled mix of pale and red as he scrambled to form an answer. That didn't expose him completely. That was before she betrayed my trust. Your Honor, before she chose some random boy over her own family. The context changed everything. Judge Judy didn't hesitate. Her response landed like a hammer. The context changes nothing. Mr. Bennett, a gift is a gift. You do not get to retroactively turn presents into loans because you're angry about your daughter's life choices. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. She picked up another document from Emily's folder this time. A series of text messages Emily had bravely saved despite her father's repeated attempts to make her delete them. Judge Judy began reading them aloud, and with each line, Richard's true character became increasingly visible to everyone watching. The first message, sent 3 days after Emily moved out, "If you don't come home right now and apologize, I will destroy you financially. You have nothing without me." The second message, sent a week later, "I made you. I own everything you have. The car, the clothes, even your education. You'll learn you can't survive without me." The third message, "I'll make sure everyone knows what an ungrateful, disrespectful daughter you are. You'll crawl back when that loser boyfriend realizes you aren't worth it." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Richard sat motionless, finally realizing that his carefully maintained image of a devoted father was unraveling on national television. Judge Judy still wasn't done. She lifted another. Documents swan the car's payment, history, and registration. Ms. Bennett, who has been making the monthly payments on this vehicle. Emily's voice was steadier now, strengthened by finally being heard. "I have, Your Honor, every payment for the last 3 years. It's registered in my name. The insurance is in my name. I have every document." Judge Judy turned back to Richard with barely concealed disgust. "So let me get this straight, Mr. Bennett. You gave your daughter a car, wrote that it had no strings attached, made her pay for it herself. And now you want her to return it and pay you $5,000 because she moved out and started dating someone you don't approve of." Richard's anger finally overpowered his self-control. He made the mistake that would destroy him completely in the public eye. He stood, pointed his finger at Judge Judy, and raised his voice, exposing the same intimidation he had used on Emily for 19 years. "Your Honor, you don't understand what it's like to raise a child today. These kids need firm boundaries. They need to know that respect for parental authority isn't optional. My daughter is my daughter, and I have the right as her father to expect obedience and gratitude. She is my responsibility, my investment, and she doesn't just get to walk away because some boyfriend tells her she deserves independence." Courtroom erupted. Audience members shook their heads in disbelief. Some openly reacted to Richard's words. And Judge Judy's expression had hardened into a cold fury, one that would later become one of the most replayed moments in courtroom television history. "Mr. Bennett, sit down. Now," Judge Judy commanded, her voice carrying unmistakable authority and barely restrained anger at what she had just heard. What followed wasn't merely a legal ruling. It was a complete dismantling of everything Richard Bennett believed about fatherhood, control, and his supposed right to claim ownership over another human being. "Let me tell you what I see, Mr. Bennett. Because it's clear no one in your life has had the courage to tell you the truth," Judge Judy began. "I see a man who has mistaken control for parenting. I see someone who keeps receipts on love. I see a father who treated his daughter like an investment portfolio instead of a human being deserving of unconditional support. You didn't raise a daughter, Mr. Bennett. You raised a prisoner. And the moment she had the courage to escape, you attempted to use the legal system to drag her back into captivity. She then turned to face the camera, addressing the millions of viewers watching from home. Her words would go on to be quoted in parenting forums, therapy sessions, and family courtrooms for years. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what emotional abuse looks like. This is what happens when a parent believes that providing food, shelter, and material goods entitles them to ownership over another person's life. Mr. Bennett here thinks that because he paid for his daughter's childhood, which is literally his legal obligation as a parent, she now owes him lifelong obedience and gratitude. He believes love is a transaction where he can collect interest on every birthday present and Christmas gift. This is not parenting. This is manipulation masquerading as parental authority. Richard attempted to interrupt again, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. But Judge Judy silenced him with a single look. "You will not speak again unless I ask you a direct question. Mr. Bennett, you have already said more than enough." She turned back to Emily, and her stern expression softened. Drying tears from Emily's eyes, "Emily, listen to me carefully. You do not owe your father $15,000. You do not owe him the car that you have been paying for yourself. You do not owe him gratitude for doing the bare minimum the law requires of parents providing for their minor children. What your father calls loans were gifts, and the evidence you have provided makes that absolutely clear. Those birthday cards, those messages, those payment records, they tell the story of a young woman who has been gaslit into believing she's ungrateful, when the truth is that she's finally becoming free." The ruling came swiftly, with a finality that left no room for argument. "Mr. Bennett, your case is dismissed with prejudice. The car belongs to Emily. She has made the payments. It is registered in her name, and your supposed gift was exactly that, a gift. You do not get to take it back because you are angry. Furthermore, I am awarding Emily $5,000 for the emotional distress you have caused her, the harassment she has endured, and the court costs she has incurred defending herself from this vindictive lawsuit. You came here to humiliate your daughter, Mr. Bennett, but instead you've exposed yourself as a controlling, manipulative individual who weaponizes love and uses money as a tool of abuse." Judge Judy leaned forward, delivering the line that would become the most quoted phrase from any courtroom show in television history. "Let me offer you some advice, Mr. Bennett, though I doubt you'll take it people like you rarely do. Your daughter does not belong to you. She never did. You were given the privilege of raising her, guiding her, preparing her for independence. That was your job. Instead, you try to own her, control her, and shape her into an extension of your ego. You have lost more than this case today. You have lost any chance at a real relationship with your daughter until you seek serious professional help. I recommend therapy, Mr. Bennett, because your behavior is textbook narcissistic abuse. And unless you confront that, you will continue to destroy every relationship you touch." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the stunned courtroom. Case dismissed. Next case. Richard Bennett sat motionless for a moment, his world collapsing around him, before he finally stood and stormed out, muttering threats and insults that only confirmed everything Judge Judy had just said about him. Emily remained seated, shaking with relief as the audience rose to applaud her courage. Then Judge Judy did something rare. She stepped down from the bench and quietly spoke to Emily for a moment. They were words the microphones didn't catch, but everyone in the courtroom saw the exchange. Whatever Judge Judy whispered brought a smile through Emily's tears, the first genuine smile she'd shown since the entire ordeal began. Within 6 hours of the episode airing, the clip had exploded across social media. In its first week alone, it reached 60 million views, prompting countless reaction videos, essays on toxic parenting, and a nationwide discussion about the difference between healthy boundaries and controlling abuse. The #defend Emily trended worldwide for 3 straight days. Mental health professionals began using the footage in trainings on identifying emotional abuse. Online support groups for adult children of narcissistic parents formed, with many citing Emily's courage as their inspiration. Richard Bennett's life unraveled quickly. His company demanded his resignation after the video went viral, and employees came forward with their own complaints about his leadership. His extended family, now seeing his true behavior exposed, cut ties. He became the public face of toxic parenting. Cautionary tale of what happens when control disguises itself as love. But the most profound impact was on Emily. A GoFundMe, created by strangers, raised over $180,000 toward her education. Emily accepted only what she needed for tuition and donated the rest to organizations that help young adults escape abusive family situations. 6 months after her appearance in Judge Judy's courtroom, Emily was thriving in college. She was still with Jake, building a life rooted in freedom rather than fear, and discovering what it felt like to make choices without the threat of punishment or emotional manipulation hanging over her. She started a blog to share her story and support others facing similar struggles. Thousands of people reached out to thank her for giving them the courage to establish their own boundaries. Judge Judy's defense of Emily wasn't just about one lawsuit or one family. It became a message that echoed among millions who had been conditioned to believe that setting limits with toxic parents was disrespectful or ungrateful. It validated those who had been told that love required accepting control. And it showed that sometimes, when you finally stand up for yourself, a person you feared would judge you is actually the one waiting to defend you.